Hey there, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube. Before the video starts, I want to let you know that if you like it, to leave a like and a comment down below. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel and click the little bell icon to be up to date with my latest content, as well as joining the notification squad or wolfification squad like this pack legend here. Thanks for your support, and enjoy the video. War is hell. At least, that is how the old saying went until one soldier went down the dark path of cannibalism at his post in Alaska. It was a routine training exercise with his unit to keep them ready for any eventuality. It was a relatively nice afternoon with a light layer of snow on the ground and a shiny sheen of ice that would trip the unsuspecting private who didn't pay attention. Black ice is a bitch, the soldier's friend says with a laugh, watching a private fall flat on his back. Not very chatty today, Colt? His friend asks, having a sip of his coffee, letting the warm liquid flow down his throat. Colt looked at his friend, rubbing his eyes.
Sleep deprivation again, Colt?
Called the voice of their commanding officer, grabbing both their attention. It feels more like a gnawing voice in my mind, sir, Colt says groggily, covering his mouth as he yawns. Colt's friend grabbed a handful of snow and dumped it down the back of his uniform, making him jump awake as the frozen particles melted against his back. What the fuck, Matt? Colt yelled, looking ready to deck his friend who was laughing on the hood of the Humvee. Although the sight was amusing, their commanding officer was less than amused by what he was seeing.
Lock it down, you two, and prepare to ship out.
The audible groans from Matt and two others of their squad was enough to earn a knife glare from their commanding officer, shutting them up quickly.
If you grunts are quite done, we're heading out.
Colt never enjoyed these war games himself, as it only showed him how completely inept he was at his job. If he had just studied harder and gotten a better score on the test, then maybe he wouldn't be amongst the others in infantry. He only blamed himself for his own failures as he checked his practice rifle. This is gonna suck hard, he muttered to himself as Matt jumped down into his crater. Sup, Colt? Ugh! Jeez, Matt. Give him a heart attack, why don't you? Colt hissed between his teeth as he sat next to him. You are such a jumpy puppy, Matt said with a laugh, before getting slugged in the shoulder by Colt. With a grunt of displeasure, Colt leaned back against the frozen mud when they heard a twig snap nearby, making him jump. Jeez, Colt, just relax. It's probably a deer, Matt says, setting down his rifle. This is a practice ground. There shouldn't be wildlife here. The fences don't stop the weather, so no doubt it doesn't stop the local fauna. Come on, Matt, be serious. What if it's the other team? Chill, Leo. Before Colt could retort, another twig snapped, this time a bit closer to the crater. Okay, that wasn't a deer, Matt said, grabbing his rifle and loading his training rounds into the gun. I'm going to take a peek. Matt poked his head out to survey the area as he spots a small group of people moving slowly to the tree line. All of them wearing red flags on their sleeves. Definitely the enemy team, he whispers to Colt as he loads his training rounds. They haven't noticed us yet. This makes things easier. As Matt readied himself to jump the enemy team, snow began to fall. Odd? Wasn't it supposed to be a clear day today? Colt asked as the snow fell faster. Didn't you learn anything in basic? We have to fight in any terrain and in any type of weather, Matt hissed, trying to shut Colt up. Colt was about to retort until their radio crackled as their commanding officer chimed in, his voice trying to cut through the ice like a knife, his transmission fading in and out due to the poor weather.
Colt, Matt, rendezvous at base camp. Red team is making their way to us. The flag is in danger.
Hearing the order, Colt looks at Matt, who painfully watches as the red group continue to walk away. Okay, let's get moving, Leo. Matt groaned as they climbed out of the crater and made their way back to base camp. As they moved back towards base camp, the weather steadily got worse, with the wind picking up. It's a whiteout out here! Colt yelled to Matt over the howling wind. We need to find shelter! Matt yelled back as their movement slowed to a crawl before spotting a cave with a blinding mass of falling light. Head to that cave! We can hunker down until the storm passes! Colt didn't have room to make an argument, as he could barely see past Matt. Against his own judgment, he followed Matt into the cave. The howling winds were a bit dulled as the snowflakes made like little white speckles on the dark stone floor of the cave. Matt began to set up some twigs for a small campfire as he used his survival knife to light it up. Sergeant is going to blow a gasket when we don't report him, Colt said as he warmed his hands by the fire. I know, Leo. Damn, it's cold in here. Yep. Colt looked at the entry of the cave as the sun began to set on the horizon. I say we try to head out, return to camp. Matt shook his head in disapproval. If there's one thing dumber than going out into a blizzard, it's going out into a blizzard at night, Colt. Never try it unless you want to end up as a frozen statue outside, Matt said as he pulled out an MRE. The long night had begun. The next few days only seemed to get worse as the weather had not improved for the pair, the situation being harder for Colt as he descends into a sleep-deprived madness. Matt watched as his friend made his slow descent into insanity. Leo, you need to eat something and get some sleep. He tried to protest to his friend, only to hear a slight growl from Colt as he gnawed at his frostbitten hands to keep them warm. Colt heard a dark voice whisper into his ears as it continued to eat away at his mind. Shut up. Colt growled out, trying to keep his hands warm as Matt walked up behind him. You should get some sleep, Leo. I will take this watch, Matt said, trying to be gentle towards his friend, putting a hand on his shoulder. I said, shut up! Colt yelled out as he proceeds to beat Matt to death with a sharp rock. Matt's pleas for Colt to stop were left unheard as Colt laughed aloud as he continued to beat him with the rock, painting the walls of the cave with a spray of dark crimson. Colt stopped his assault on his friend as his body twitched with a death rattle, looking down at the macabre scene in front of him. Colt looked down on his blood-soaked hands and back to the bloody corpse that was his friend. The dark voice in his mind said to him, sounding more malicious, dropping to his knees and hungrily drooling on the remains of Matt. He heard the voice growl out, intensifying his hunger. He did not disappoint the voice as he ripped open Matt's uniform and tore a chunk of flesh from his abdomen, chewing on the skin and bloodied muscle tissue as it steams in the cold air. The bad taste of raw meat didn't deter him from eating Matt and licking the blood off his hands. His hunger didn't subside as he continued to feast on the raw flesh, ripping out bones and breaking them open to suck out the marrow within. The heart he had saved for last, as he salivated over the still organ, blood still dripping onto the ground, creating a great lake of crimson before plunging his teeth into it, taking his sweet time chewing on it. The cave was left silent as the hungry slurping of blood ceased, before Colt started screaming in pain, feeling his body shift as bones broke in him or rearranged. His screams stopped as his transformation finished, his intakes of air sounding more like hungry growls as he dragged his new claws on the floor. I need more. The sergeant was gathering the remainder of his men to once again go out and look for his lost pair of troopers. Each team he sent out, however, was never seen again.
This is getting worse,
he said to himself as one of his lower enlisted walked into the tent holding a blood-covered uniform. Sir, my group found this in a cave not far from here, the private said, his hands shaking. It's Matt's, sir. The sergeant held up the torn up, bloody remains of the uniform. "There's something else, sir." The sergeant looked up at the private, and only now did he realize how pale he was.
What's wrong?
"I have a feeling we were being followed." Before he could say more, gunfire rang out at the camp.
Negligent discharge of blanks, no doubt.
The sergeant said, until he heard screaming. "Get the live rounds!" He heard a soldier scream out, until something ripped his head off, spraying a deep crimson into the air, and then into the mouth of a monster, who slurped it down hungrily, with blood dripping down its chin, soaking its gray chest fur. It looked straight at him and the private, with a hungry gaze, bits of flesh dangling from its blood-stained yellow teeth, staring daggers at them with a pair of glowing pale slits for eyes. The creature growled at them, its hot breath steaming in the cold air.
What the fuck is that?
The sergeant asked, pulling out his gun. "It's a Wendigo, sir," the private said, his voice shaking with fear. The sergeant had little time to react as the beast jumped onto the private, ripping him apart. The kid had no time to scream as the Wendigo crushed his head in its mouth. The sergeant shot the beast to no avail as it slashed his throat with its blood-caked claws, and returning its attention to the private. The camp went silent as each enlisted soldier was cut down and subsequently eaten by the Wendigo, who looked out on the macabre scene of body parts and bloody entrails strung out on the ground. He turned his skull head back to look at the sergeant, who continued to fight to stay alive on the ground, holding his bleeding neck. "Still alive." The Wendigo asked in a frost-chilled and shaky voice that the sergeant recognized. His eyes widened in fear of who was growling hungrily in front of him. He watched in horror as the Wendigo brought his clawed left foot to his chest, bringing his long, raptor-like claw down into his heart, ripping his chest open. As he lay dying on the cold ground, the sergeant watches as Leo Colt gorged himself into the bloody cavity that was his chest. The last thing he heard as he died was the slurping of his blood.